The rain was merciless that night. It poured down in heavy sheets, turning the old country road into a river of mud and regret. His headlights cut through the mist, trembling against the wind, and the wipers groaned like tired lungs. Daniel hadn't been back here in 7 years. 7 years since that night, the night he'd sworn he would never return. But fate, in its cruel, mysterious way, had a strange habit of leading broken souls back to the places they least wanted to go. His heart thudded heavily as he pulled into the driveway, the same gravel path that had once echoed with laughter, with promises, and with the sound of her voice calling his name under the golden porch light. He killed the engine, sat there for a long moment, staring at the faint glow seeping from the cracks of the front door, and whispered to himself, "If she's still here, maybe there's still hope." Before we go deeper into this story, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, share it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel Kindness Speaks. Your support helps us bring more real, emotional stories that remind the world that kindness still matters. He stepped out into the storm, clutching his coat tighter, his boots sinking into the wet earth. Every step toward that house felt heavier than the last. The mailbox still leaned to the left, the porch lights still flickered, the wind carried the faint scent of lavender, the same flowers she used to plant by the window every spring. Time had passed, but some things refused to change, like ghosts anchored to a single memory. When he finally reached the door, he hesitated. His hand hovered above the doorknob, trembling not from the cold, but from fear, the fear of facing everything he'd run away from. He knocked once, silence, then again. And as the wind howled, the door slowly creaked open. There she was, Emma. Her hair was a little grayer now, her eyes softer but deeper, carrying both exhaustion and grace. She stood in her old blue sweater, the one he'd bought her during that trip to the coast, back when they still believed love could fix anything. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain beating against the roof, the thunder rolling in the distance. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You really came back." Something inside Daniel broke at those words. It wasn't anger or relief. It was something raw, something heavy. He wanted to say so much. He wanted to explain why he'd left, how every night he'd thought of her, how guilt had been his only companion since the accident. But the words got stuck somewhere between his heart and his throat. All he managed was a simple, "I had to." He hadn't come for forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve it. He had come because after all the years of running, from pain, from truth, from himself, there was nowhere left to go. And because the letter she'd sent 6 weeks ago still echoed in his mind. "If you ever find your way back here, the door will be open." Inside, the house felt like stepping into a dream frozen in time. The same worn sofa, the same ticking clock, the same faint scent of vanilla candles and warm tea. Only one thing was missing, the laughter of a child, their son, Oliver. The name hung unspoken in the air between them like a shadow that neither could escape. It had been 7 years since the accident that tore everything apart. 7 years since Daniel's reckless decision behind the wheel had taken their little boy's life. He remembered the night like it had burned itself into his skin. The rain, the curve in the road, the headlights of the truck that came out of nowhere, and Emma's scream, haunting, endless. Afterward, there had been only silence, the kind of silence that destroys people from the inside out. He couldn't bear to stay. Every room in that house felt like a grave. So he ran, to the city, to noise, to work, to anything that drowned out the guilt. But guilt has a way of surviving every distraction. It followed him like a shadow. Now, standing here again, he realized how much time had stolen. Emma's eyes weren't the same. They carried stories of nights spent crying alone, of mornings where she forced herself to keep breathing. She invited him in without a word, poured 2 cups of tea, and sat across from him. The silence was painful, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything they never said. Hours passed as rain whispered against the windows. Slowly, words began to return. She asked about his work, his health, the places he'd been. He answered quietly, carefully, as though each word might break something fragile. And then, finally, she asked the question he'd feared most. Why now, Daniel? He stared at his cup, the steam curling like memories he couldn't control. Because I finally realized, he said, voice shaking, that running away doesn't undo the past. It just makes you forget who you are. She looked at him, eyes glistening. And who are you now? He swallowed hard. Someone who wants to make things right, even if I can't fix what's gone. Emma's hand trembled slightly as she set her cup down. You can't bring him back, Daniel, I know, he said. But maybe I can bring us back. That was when she broke. Tears streamed down her face. Not of anger, but of release. She'd held them in for years, burying her pain beneath the daily routines of survival. They both cried then, wordlessly, as the storm outside softened to a whisper. Over the next few days, something unexpected began to grow between them. Not the same love as before, but something quieter, humbler. Daniel stayed to help around the house, fixing old creaky steps, repainting the porch, trimming the lavender by the window. Each task was small, but each carried a silent apology. He never asked for forgiveness again. He simply showed it, one act at a time. Emma watched him quietly. She still wore grief like a second skin, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone in it. They began to talk about Oliver, not as a wound, but as a memory. They looked at his old drawings, his favorite toy truck, his little handprints on the wall, and in those shared moments of pain, something miraculous began to happen, healing. One evening, Daniel found an old photo album. Inside was a picture of the three of them, Oliver sitting between them, smiling wide, missing a tooth. Underneath, in Emma's handwriting, were the words, "Our forever." He looked at her, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "I'm sorry." She nodded softly. "I know." The next morning they drove together to the cemetery. The sun was rising, the air crisp and clear. They stood by Oliver's grave in silence. Daniel knelt, placed a small wooden toy he'd carved beside the stone, and said, "I miss you, buddy." Then he felt Emma's hand rest gently on his shoulder. For the first time in 7 years they prayed together, not for answers, but for peace. Days turned into weeks. The pain didn't vanish, but it changed. It became something they could carry together instead of apart. Daniel started volunteering at a local children's center, teaching kids how to build things with their hands. He told them about mistakes and second chances, though he never mentioned his own by name. Emma joined him sometimes, helping with art projects, smiling faintly when the laughter of children filled the room. And one evening, as they locked up the center, she turned to him and said softly, "Maybe we're not meant to forget, Daniel. Maybe we're meant to live enough to remember differently." He nodded. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is. That night, they stood again on the porch, beneath the flickering light. The lavender swayed gently in the breeze. The rain had long stopped, but the air still smelled of renewal. Emma looked at him for a long moment before saying quietly, "You really came back." He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "This time, I'm staying." The camera could have faded there, their silhouettes framed against the soft golden glow, two souls scarred but slowly healing. But life, like love, doesn't end in neat cinematic moments. It continues, day by day, quietly, beautifully, imperfectly.